Welcome everyone to our webinar. I'm very excited today to have a guest partner with us, and I think you're going to enjoy hearing a lot of what he brings to the table and also what he's been looking at. I don't know if it's okay to say a doctoral candidate, but working through, James will be helping us talk about organizational productivity through global partnerships. Now, this has a lot of different tentacles in different places. So as you know, Advisicon, we work in technology and project program and portfolio management. But more appropriately is that we look at how organizations deliver results. And this is important because we are no longer in a localized world anymore. It's not just you and your local team. It's you and your local team and the vendor or the customer or your partners. So a little bit about the authors. So again, you guys have probably heard me many times. I'm Tim Runcie. I'm the CEO of Advisicon. In fact, I've just stepped away from, I think, my 17th or 18th year at Microsoft working on strategic initiatives and technology, and love to share good wisdom, good approaches, things that will help you avoid all my mistakes that I've made as a CEO and as a president and as a tactical leader. James, you want to just kind of tell a little bit about your background and things that you've done in the past that bring you to our session today?
Thank you, Tim. It's great to be with you today. My background is in education as a math and business teacher, but my heart and my passion is for entrepreneurship, for establishing partnerships. I moved to Central Asia 16 years ago to teach initially, taught at a university, some international business marketing classes, grant writing. And then as I got excited teaching the students, I found I was learning more from them than what I was teaching, and just delved into what is needed to see some development in some of the countries in Central Asia to bring them up to the next level. And for Central Asia, the key is certainly international partnerships. But what I learned as I delved into that is how much value added there could be for both partners as we've connected those in the U.S. and Europe with partners in Central Asia. So it's been a lot of fun to be involved in international business partnerships.
Well, I think you said it well, which is as a teacher, you learn almost more from your students than in many cases they might be learning from you. And as you're kind of laying down that path of knowledge, the things that you learn from their questions, from their interactions, their experience, it's like literally you know, every class you teach or you're involved in, if you make that collaborative, really grows your knowledge exponentially. And so I love to hear that. And again, so many business leaders, program managers, people that are working with diverse teams really have not spent time thinking about how they execute, or if we're thinking about maybe growing their business or extending their profitability by reducing cost or finding new market share, really just haven't had a lot of time to kind of think through that and work into that area. So today, hence our meeting and presentation, is we're going to talk a little bit about the business and international overview and what's happening certainly in today's world, as well as what are the market forces that are really impacting and creating opportunities. In fact, if you think about for every crisis, there is always a silver lining. For every opportunity, sometimes there are pitfalls you want to avoid. And so we'll drill into some of the right questions to ask if you're considering maybe launching into anywhere in Asia Pacific, or if we talk about the entire Silk Road. There are a lot of opportunities that are available, and also the idea of saying, how can you do that and do it successfully without having to, go and get your own PhD around doing international business. And so back to that partnership, it's huge. There are lots of pitfalls. Again, we'll talk about things to step over, step around. Sometimes you have to embrace it and work through that. And I think that'll be helpful. And James, I'm excited to have you kind of bring your experience to bear with that. And then I think we'll summarize a little bit with what we talk about as our top 5. Like, what are some of the top best practices in growing globally, whether you're opening an office, extending, a market sector that you're going to offer to, or recruiting, hiring, or training. Ultimately, you are in a position where you want to deliver results, or you're delivering results, and maybe you're already working in an international market. So there's some real things that will be helpful for us to go through today. But let's talk about Silk Road for just a moment. So James, I think you got into a little of your background, how you started. Tell us a little bit more about Silk Road and what you guys do. In fact, I think you even have another business that you're launching that isn't just around the technology support, but really the coaching and mentoring. So tell us a little bit about that.
So my main involvement has been three businesses that I have started, and then some other consulting for international schools, which I also enjoy quite a bit. But I started a language school first. My wife's an ESL teacher. There was demand in the community for English learning. Instead of my wife teaching a few students, she trained a number of local teachers who then have impacted 3,000 students over the past 12 years. The second business, we also had some computer classes at that school, but the second business was looking for partnerships in IT. And so we found some really strong programming students looking for jobs there. Job creation is huge for Central Asia's needs. And it's often difficult for IT companies in the US to find strong employees. And also if there's a pressure to lower costs. So we've been able to connect clients in the US and Europe with 5 programming teams in Central Asia to deliver strong software development results at low cost. That's been a lot of fun. That is running by itself for the most part. I really enjoy the visits and encouraging the teams there, tweaking the structures and financial models where needed. But my focus is now looking at how can we do a similar thing in other fields. So as a consultant for Silk Road Professionals Consulting, I will be looking at what are other areas, whether it's agricultural business or other aspects of IT or education, manufacturing, that I can help connect clients with needs in the U.S. To people looking for jobs and with strong skills in Central Asia.
That's pretty exciting. In fact, what I found intriguing as we started talking was the fact that you have put something in place and that you can step away. Now, if you're a business leader or you're thinking about, launching your own company, one of the great exit strategies is how do you stand something up that will work, that will be has its business systems, people know how to tweak and adjust it. But in many cases, you don't have to be there day in and day out, baking the cookies, taking them in there, going to the store, getting the flour, putting them all there. And what's interesting around the globalization of both the workforce and the work opportunities is that, when you look at what's happening in both at agricultural, manufacturing, from labor opportunities, and then, even in the technology space, is that there are some amazingly hungry and bright, energetic folks that just need, like you said, little teaching, little training. And certainly business English, or we'll call that, as my father actually teaches English as a second language, which he did as his second career after retiring from UPS after 30 years. He loved it. But he said, if people can understand you, then you're doing it correctly. It's not like you have to pronounce it perfectly. Is it the King's English? Is it American English? Is it, is it some flavor of those? But really the idea is that education and knowledge, this is a great, both not only a workforce, but also a great opportunity to leverage and extend market share. So we're going to drill into some of that. I think that's helpful. There's a couple links on the screen here. I encourage you guys all to take a look at it. And even if you just want to talk with James a little bit about what he's doing and what he's done, some of the success factors, I think that'll be really important for you to glean from that. So let's talk about international business and team productivity experience. And again, this has a lot of twists and turns around that. And so I love this little graphic here where this poor guy's running away from a bull. But the idea is that experience in many cases comes from, scars, bumps, bruises, and from mistakes. And, interesting enough is that you have to allow for room for trial and error in many cases. But in today's economy, in many cases, you don't have a lot of budget just to throw and then suddenly realize, that whole endeavor has slipped. Now we're late to market or we aren't going to get there. So, in a nutshell, Advisicon, my company, has been around for almost, I think, 30 years, 1992. So we're really coming right up on that 30-year mark. And again, there's been many evolutionary journey steps. We evolve, we'll de-evolve a little bit and continue to morph and move forward. But we work across today 7 different countries. We have an international tech team, and we work with rollouts. We certainly work with our customers globally. And so when you begin thinking about your workforce or your team, or how do you productize, or it's great to say, listen, the customer hands something to us, we modify it, we get it set up, then basically our overseer or offshore team might actually tackle that. And when we wake up in the morning, we're continuing to have this rolling 24/7 productivity element. This is the world that we live in today. And whether you look at Google or Microsoft, or you look at IBM, you look at a lot of other organizations, they have moved to a larger workforce to be able to supplement what's happening. So with Silk Road Professionals, I think you were talking a little bit about, James, about regional and cultural experience. Like, that is something that you don't just inherit automatically. You might have a great product and you have a great vision around how you're going to see that happen. But when you go into different markets, there's a lot of things that are unique to that each sector. You want to talk through some of the bottom bullets here, just kind of from a talking point, James? What are your thoughts around the experience that people need to pick up if they're going to deliver?
Well, partnership's all about relationships. And so we want to have trusting relationships, understanding relationship, places where if there's cultural nuances that we're not getting, we can step back and ask the other person how they're doing and where the miscommunication might be. For me, a key has been teams. Having a leadership team that's in place so that I can step away as I travel back and forth, but also having teams overseas that if somebody isn't able to continue, there's someone else ready to step up. So I am actually fairly reluctant for the people that do remote work with one individual in another setting around the world, because there's a lot that goes into the cultural understanding, the working together as team. I like clusters of teams of 5, 10, 20 people. And there needs to be a bridge builder who helps make that initial connection, helps each side of the partnership understand what the cultural concerns and interests might be. But once that relationship is bridged, then it just takes time working together, having fun, seeing the work be done productively, and moving forward.
With the kind of the regional cultural experience, again, from what I've seen, I'll talk about, our pain in the past, which is yes doesn't always mean yes. One word may have a very different connotation. Even just the phraseology or the tone in which things are said can be perceived or taken. And if we're talking about translating requirements, saying, hey, we're going to build a widget, or I'm going to, create, a manufacturing production plant, there's a lot of intricacies there. James, do you have any maybe examples of where the cultural piece trumped, even the best team members or the knowledge of the product or solution? Any experience or anything that you want to kind of share around just that whole cultural element?
Certainly. Central Asia is such a warm culture, a lot of hospitality, time for drinking tea, building those relationships. Large extended family gatherings happen frequently. Neighbors get together for meals once a month, often in the community we lived. One of our clients for software development is in the Netherlands, a culture that would be much more direct. And so sometimes we have some miscommunication where our programmers are working at something, maybe something was misunderstood, and a very direct comment from the client in the Netherlands can be offensive to a warm culture. And so it's good to have a couple of bridge builders involved that when there's some miscommunication, we can just pull the team together and say, let's talk this through and understand what happened culturally that led to people perceiving something that was different than what was intended by the message. So the HR gets a little bit more complicated across cultures.
I've seen organizations say, oh, hey, listen, I can get, these type of resources for this, hourly rate. And it's so much less than, going maybe over here, and they're shopping around. But without the context of having someone who is either, in fact, one of the things that was kind of an eye opener for us over the last 5 to 10 years has been that, people are trying to say, well, let's take one of our local resources and embed them in the culture and have them learn. But really, in many cases, people have come to the U.S. They've gotten an education in England or somewhere, and you have these expats that have gone back home that really want to grow and take care of their family. And so, like you said, finding that shepherd or finding that bridge builder that says, look, if you're going to do work here, I do know the culture. I grew up here. I know the streets. I know what happens. And when we think about project, program, and portfolio management, where we say, what are we trying to accomplish? This project charter aligns to, this is what we're trying to accomplish. In many cases, the steps that we might be outlining may not necessarily align to delivering the results. And so having that cultural experience to know how to communicate that and engender that ideation of, like you said, having fun, being agile to work through to a solution is something that you can't just go out and say, yep, let me check that box. I have it directly. So yeah, go ahead, James.
Let me share another story on that. My lead partner in Central Asia had been in the US for 2 years as a programming intern. The company that he was working with was looking to do work overseas. We use a staff augmentation model, so it's the same team working together across time zones. But there was a young American programmer who he was sitting next to while he was in the US. And after his 2 years as an intern here, the young American developer said that he also wanted to go to Central Asia and learn more about the culture there, and went there for the next 3.5 years. So these two young men sat side by side in different cultures and deeply understood each other by the end of that 5 years together. And so it's easy for them to bring others into the business partnership relationship on both sides and understand one another. Now, not every business is going to have that type of an opportunity, but that's what we want to seek to develop, is how is their understanding and who are those bridge people that help the teams to work together a lot more productively.
And I think that's an interesting story because, when COVID came, again, from a technology firm, we went digital overnight, which was fantastic. However, you kind of miss that connectedness. Well, our team realized that some of them, like, I can live anywhere as long as I have internet access. And so they picked up and went to Costa Rica, which we have an operations center down there, but they never even went into the office. They just went down there and stayed in some really, kind of a nice remote area, quiet. But people packed up and moved around. And as long as they were being, connected, and that's where that kind of that lead or that local resource, perhaps, that might help you bridge the gap if you're not there personally, was great. But like you said, the culture, the rich enjoyment is what we look at the generation X, Y, Z, the millennials that we call them now the Gen Zennials, right? The idea of even boomers are saying, look, I may be coming back to the workforce, but I don't have to drive into the office. We have a very different model and modality for what's going on in the workforce today. In fact, that actually impacts some of what we call our global market forces that are changing. And I thought we'd talk through a few things here, a little bit about what are some of the big picture changes. Again, like I said, I'm stepping away from, looking at next 2 generations of technology changes coming out of Microsoft. And so there's things I can't talk about, but I can talk about the fact that as an organization, you have to evolve, you have to adapt, or you will go extinct, right? You need to be looking at, well, can we move into a different market? Sure, the rates might be different, but also the production of what you're trying to produce might be different. Or can we globalize that? And so this world is totally a connected system. It really is. James, what are you seeing in terms of globalization of not just people, but solutions, products delivery, maybe in Southeast Asia? What are you seeing, from just your years of experience in business?
Years ago, as a business teacher at university, I came across a statement that most innovation in the U.S. is led by someone who came from another country and was in the U.S., where they were looking at things with new eyes. They had access to resources here that maybe they didn't in their home country. But it was that cross-pollination. Likewise, I think when we have someone from the US living internationally, they're seeing things differently. And when you have two people like that interacting who've both been back and forth, that's where we generate the most new ideas, solutions for the world.
I know sometimes when, as our organization has grown and I've had to learn more about, HR things, like I just can't go give everybody a hug because I'm a hugger and that's just the way I am, because culture, family of origin, all gives people different insights and different perspectives. And whether you're thinking about, building a new car or creating a manufacturing component, how we execute, how we implement, I think you said it well, is that innovation, you can't force it, right? You really want to put it into a room and let it happen. And so you need to create space for that, as well as bring in elements that say, if all we did, if we are nothing but hammers, then the whole world looks like a nail. We're only going to have one type of solution. And that's always a lot of fun, is to be able to step back and say, I really want to ideate. Think through this, and especially if you're trying to penetrate into a new market. If you don't have a local resource or someone who is not approaching it from that mindset, it's going to be very difficult.
Tim, a lot of companies branch out internationally, like you've said here, either to be more competitive by lowering their employee cost or to expand their markets. Both are excellent reasons to make that first step into international partnerships. But I'd encourage companies not to limit themselves to that. Mm-hmm. That as you make those steps, you're looking for those new employees at lower rates, you're looking to expand your market. Also look for where does this partnership generate new possibilities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's that whole staying competitive. While yes, it might be trying to basically create a product or a service. One of the things that we're seeing certainly in, let's call it just application development or the release cycle, is that the level of testing, the level of intricacies and how many open APIs. We now run around with cell phones. I forgot what they're saying. There's close to 2 billion cell phones out in certain markets. And so if you're thinking about building an app, well, the idea of being competitive and certainly saying, look, we have to test it. It isn't just, I'm building it for this operating system. It really has a multi-dimensional effect, which requires good time. And so if you're interested in ensuring that you have high quality, certainly, cost-effective options, you do need to look at an expanded workforce, or the idea that you can have that rolling 24/7, says I've got a team in one country that might work on it, and then perhaps we do handoffs, but then there's that collaboration that happens. And I find that, back to that teaching example, is we learn from our students. I encourage people who are watching this, like, you're going to learn from your teams that come from different cultures, ideas and thoughts. And so I know many cases traditional Western approach is, in many cases, they think they have the answers, but you will learn, you'll be amazed, and you'll be humbled by just what you will discover. Certainly going into a new market or into an area or working with resources that do see things differently. One of the things that we hear commonly, and I'm going to use the term VUCA, and so people go, what, VUCA? That sounds like some sort of, a drill. But really, VUCA was created by the military to describe situations that are volatile, uncertain, complex, or ambiguous, hence the VUCA. And you think about that, is that when you go into a situation or scenario, the best laid plans change when you actually start executing. And so the idea is that the pandemic, which we did not all anticipate, suddenly changed things. Well, James, you've probably been around through many VUCA events, right? Y2K, the .com, the .bomb. I mean, there is so many things that we see, and you go, oh, wait a minute, this isn't just an isolated once a decade thing. There are many of these events that happen. So how do you prepare? Certainly if you're thinking about moving into, say, Southeast Asia, or broadening whether you're leveraging those teams, what are some things that you can share with that says, to be more nimble and agile and make sure that you can kind of adjust or adapt and have visibility of what's happening and work through that? What do you see that offers people who are interested in moving in Southeast Asia or leveraging that through a partnership?
Flexibility is definitely the key. As we've looked to build relationships and look for opportunities, I enjoy change, and so I enjoy moving countries every couple years. I enjoy changing jobs, starting a new business at least every 3 or 4 years, or life gets a little boring. But as part of that mindset, it's going in, looking at what are the opportunities. And while there has been so much pain in the COVID-19 pandemic, there's also been a lot of new opportunities that have opened up from a different mindset.
Thinking through some of the global market impacts, right? We talk about VUCA as a concept of events. Right now, we're observing what's happening, within the Ukraine and all that's happening there. And this is not isolated. If you go to Myanmar, you'll see there's coups, there's governments that will change. There's a lot of political upheaval in different places. So if we think about Southeast Asia, what are you seeing with just some of the current I'd say market forces that are completely changing or reshaping how things are doing? Are you seeing doors open? Are you seeing certain things close down? What is the byproduct of just some of the stressors that are going on today? And if somebody said, look, I want to come and I was thinking about opening up a business, or I actually have remote teams, are we safe in Tajikistan? What's happening? What are you seeing from just kind of your regional view?
Yeah, the world certainly is in constant change as to where the opportunities are, where the challenges are. Right now, there's a lot of companies that have been in Russia and are seeing extra challenges there, are pulling back, pulling out, but still wanting to stay in the region. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of people exploring Central Asia for how do I get more directly involved in Central Asia without necessarily the Russian connections, and the doors are open in Central Asia for business partnerships.
And I've seen, certainly where, with one crisis, it creates other opportunities. And again, kind of being nimble and agile and watching what's happening is part of what a good business leader, or if you're looking or working or staffing teams in different places, there are some important parts. One of the elements I remember when we first went into Mexico, we had an operations center in Mexico City for, I think, almost 14 years and had a large number of staff down there, is that, in many cases you have to deal with, we call it, graft, or if we think about people who are saying, look, I'm looking for a bribe, or just some of the illegal, illicit activities. It is always there. And in some countries, it's not like under the table, it is the table. But having good ethical boundaries, having great processes and standards in place really help you to avoid some of that. And while in the U.S., people call it, I'm paying a $25 expedition fee to get my paperwork through. In many cases, those are things you don't want to embrace in different cultures. And so as we look at these events that are going on, I think it's really, really important to be able to say, can I make sure that we don't, step across the line, that suddenly now everybody's coming to us saying, hey, I got my hand out because you paid, Billy Bob over there, his bribe. Now I want my bribe. And that happens. And in many cases, whether it's a Western approach that says, how do I expedite that process? That cultural element is important to have in place. And that adaptability is to say, make wise decisions as you step through, certainly either growing or launching business or delivering results, or even managing and working with teams. There are just some areas that need to come through. And I don't know, James, would you say that probably the easiest is, talk to somebody who knows or who has been through that. I wish I could tell people, look, I made the decision never to pay a bribe, and we won't do that. And so that was something we did before we went down there. But there were other mistakes that we made in terms of accounting practices and politics and, where do we put our office, and there's safe regions and unsafe regions. So talk a little bit more about, how you guys would provide. I think that's one of the things you're doing now is you're shifting out of not just providing ongoing support, but also the coaching. And that's something that I was actually really intrigued, which kind of drove this session, is talk to the coaching, the thing that you do that will help people kind of think through or understand what they can do, working directly either with you or through a partner.
Yes. Where people have their own partners and relationships that understand what's happening in Central Asia, they can do that directly. Where they don't, reaching out to a consultant is pretty critical for understanding the mindset of maybe the government officials or the suppliers that you're working with the fire department or health inspectors is always a challenge in Central Asia. And so that is actually a large part of the consulting that I'm doing right now is somebody saying, hey, there's this situation, it feels awful, emotions rise to the ceiling, and let's take a break. Let's talk through this. Why is this common? And how would a local business person navigate this situation? So that's a service that a good consultant is able to offer.
Well, I know people will say, I talked to the embassy or I talked to the State Department. Again, you're not necessarily you're getting a governmental, structural approach versus how do you run a business or how do you increase productivity or how do you make sure that your teams are working and or safe. The slide that I have up here right now, really in terms of looking at the new business model and what we're seeing both in software development and organizations that are building tools to begin to say, how do we address this synchronous same-time communication or different times, asynchronous communication? And whether we think in terms of whether it's a different place or the same place, whether it's face-to-face or it's distributed interactions, is that there are some exciting technologies that you're going to see emerging and also building on what's already there. Like Microsoft Teams, you talk about the ability to collaborate. If we look at other open source teams, we think about Zoom, is that these are tools that now bring connectedness together. And it's not just about, hey, I can get on a video call or record the video call, or maybe I have breakout rooms. It's, well, wait a minute, where did I put my documents? How do we quickly organize the content that we need to find? And if you have non-native English speakers or people that are coming in, you want to make sure it's not complicated. And as we look at the change in working with a global workforce, the hybrid model, in many cases, people out there feel overwhelmed or they feel like they're missing out, meaning that I need to focus or I never get caught up on all the things that are happening. And so when I can't just go and hire somebody down the street, locally, because maybe I can't afford it, but I do have a lot of administrative things that I can do. Or when we're working together, there's just way too many meetings or way too many tools. How do we begin simplifying this? And so when we think about that connectedness, working across different organizations, sharing information, but also giving people the opportunity to express that innovation. What I will be probably doing more sessions about is what's coming out to help make that happen. But there has never been a better time than if you are really thinking about either growing your team or expanding your market or moving to the area. The technologies are literally billions of dollars are being spent to reduce the friction of the tools and create more of a connected and centralized environment, which bodes really well because, James, I don't know, I mean, it used to be what, cell phones, emails, or you'd have to, set up a VPN to talk to people. What have you seen just kind of transpire in the technology sector that's made this much, much easier for you and your businesses?
Yes, well, we're working across time zones in different places. Different time. For me, it's been really key to have a agile software development model where our programmers from both teams across the ocean meet together to plan out the next 2 weeks or discuss what happened in the next 2 weeks for a couple of hour planning meeting. Our guys in Central Asia actually work late. They start at noon and work till 9 p.m. once every 2 weeks so that we can have this planning time and more face-to-face over the video call time. The rest of the days, we do a 15-minute stand-up. The end of the day in Central Asia, first thing in the morning here in the U.S., and touch base, what went well today, what's maybe needs to be talked through. Just gives a little bit of that relational time. The other thing that our programmers have appreciated a lot is that in each country, there are office spaces where they can work together in person, in teams. And while that's not critical for the more experienced developers, it's been very significant for bringing in new young developers onto the teams. So that combination of the hybrid model has worked really well for us.
So daily huddles allow you to kind of equip your team, make sure that you're in sync, and also creates kind of the relational, but also, surface questions that they need to dig into. And that works well for you guys?
Yes, very much so.
Great. Well, let's talk about some of the right questions to ask, because I know whether you're a business owner or you're thinking of just, spending some time or diversifying or expanding that out, there are always good questions to ask. And sometimes it's hard to kind of think through what they are. So I've got some of the ones that, James, you and I had kicked around here, but do you want to talk through some of these questions and why they're important and how they need to be answered, or how best to get answered with some of these?
Well, I love the stories and the user experience. And if our developers understand how the customer, the user will be affected by the software, then they build it right the first time. If there's a cultural gap in understanding, then there's room for errors, and then the rework needs to come in. So we do a lot of telling stories as to how the user will use that, try to fill in those gaps, make sure there's clarity on what needs to be solved. I do encourage our teams to ask lots of why questions,
Mm-hmm.
and often you ask why at one level and you get an answer and you say, well, why is that necessary? And you get a deeper answer. And by the third or fourth why, you really understand what is the essence here that needs to be solved and what the purpose of the product will be.
I think that we go through the law of the 5 whys, right? You ask why 5 times and eventually get down to what we call a real requirement. But this is even doubly as so when we're dealing with cross cultures, right? Different cultures, different paradigms that are being looked at. And so, like you said, what are we trying to solve here? Think about, even from a business perspective, what do we want to accomplish? And then we think about, how that will happen. So user stories, as we think in the software development world, which is really, let's put it in a sentence. Let's describe what that is. That should tease out some of our requirements or things that want to work. What other questions should a business owner or a program manager or a leader in the product space who's possibly either diversifying or has inherited, say through mergers and acquisitions, they inherited another team somewhere else, what can they do to help increase that productivity? What are the right questions or things that they need to ask about the situations they're in?
The people are certainly the most important resource for any business. And so understanding why your people are in the job, what value they receive from it, non-monetarily, is pretty critical. Our developers in Central Asia want to be on the cutting edge of technology. And so understanding that means that there are some clients that we will choose to work with and some that we will choose to say no to. Now, at the same time, our younger developers haven't had quite the same background growing up with English as a second language and don't have quite all of the foundations. So we struggle with needing some entry-level projects for those getting on board, with also knowing that we are able to hire the cream of the crop there, and that after 3 or 4 years, we need to have some pretty technically challenging work, or our developers will be looking around at other opportunities.
And doing a pilot is helpful, right? Just even if it's piloting out a small project, even if it might be a big project itself, breaking up into simple pieces and then doing, those retrospectives, saying, what did we learn? We thought we had a list of knowns. Sometimes we talk about issues management and risk management. In risk management, you call out all the risks. Here's all the things we think could happen, and let's kind of prioritize and work through that. But talking about the known unknowns, right? We know we have a gap here. We know there's a potential problem. But usually the gotchas sometimes are the unknown unknowns. And that in many cases is where you would want to leverage, say, a partner or someone who has experience, working with a diverse or a different region, and asking the questions so that your unknowns, right? Your unknown unknowns become known unknowns, and you can begin planning and working through those or tailoring that to that productivity experience. Have you seen, James, people who just have come over to Southeast Asia, thought, oh yeah, labor might be cheaper, or we'll do that, and then they fail. They fail open, or you have nonprofit organizations that want, and they have it's not about making money for them. They want to come and help organizations, but then they come over and they just did not have enough visibility to those unknown unknowns. Have you seen that happen commonly? Is it a common occurrence? What is your experience?
It certainly is common both with the nonprofits and in the business world. Just a lack of understanding is what is needed and what the root values are underneath of the cultural surface. And that's where we need to understand our people.
Agreed. Well, thinking through some of the top pitfalls to avoid, again, let's kind of summarizing a lot of the experience and just the opportunities. It is what we want to look at, is in many cases, the signs are there, but maybe reading the sign might be something that you really haven't learned to pick up on, or the telltale signs. So maybe what we can do, James, is maybe just share some of our pitfall avoidance, some of the we'll call it the scars or the bumps or the bruises that we've made over time. And again, that's where experience comes in. So I put a list here that we kind of had talked highly, but it doesn't even have to be from this list. My first one is that, yes does not mean yes. That's something that we really have to look at. Even if you have a handshake or an agreement, it is about relationships. But sometimes yes doesn't mean yes. And that's really important to understand what is the meaning of something. What are some of your top pitfalls, things to really avoid, or if you need to dig into, resolve ahead of time?
Well, most international businesses failures are because the American partner didn't listen to the local partner.
Mm.
And so listening to understand the culture, listening to understand the values. Why is this not working? Why am I not getting the productivity that I expected here? If we see things through our Western eyes, we will miss a lot in the culture. We'll miss a lot in understanding what it takes to raise that productivity. So avoiding the pitfall means having a trusted local partner who really understands what's going on locally.
Could be just even a coach, right? Come in and say, okay, this is what we're doing. Can we help lay the roadmap of what that is? And then do ongoing follow-up saying, I ran into these pitfalls. Who do I talk to? How can we talk or work through that? Certainly helpful. I came out of construction, so I always call it, measure twice, cut once. But I think really doing the reconnaissance up front is to ask those questions, which is, what don't I know? What should I be asking? What am I not following up through? And how do I ensure, success continues to breed success?
And I love the idea of learning from mistakes. We certainly want to do that. I'd rather learn from someone else's mistakes as much as possible, but I make mine quickly as well.
But you and I are teachers. We're happy to share all of our warts and flaws if it helps people really get that light bulb of understanding. One thing that I will tell you is that change will happen. It doesn't matter. You can have a great plan. We encourage that you really do engage locally. Learn as much as you can about your teams, your cultures that you're working with, even if it is remotely, or if you've inherited it, or if your business is shifting, out of one region into another. That reconnaissance, that understanding is helpful. I know, James, you stand there as a great educator, and what's great about this is we're going to be putting things out on YouTube, which is, by the way, Microsoft and other learning organizations say, the 5 to 7, video clips, people love those because they just come out there, soak up a little information, and they use that as a massive channel for knowledge. I think that's helpful. But change will happen. Things are going to adjust and change, and you have to be prepared to learn and adapt. You need to allow for some of that flexibility. So, don't budget leanly. You want to make sure you built that into what's happening. Before we wrap up any pitfalls and jump into our what I call the top 5 best practices in growing teams globally and working, within partners, and especially in Southeast Asia, any final pitfalls you can think of?
This covers a lot of it.
All right. Well, best practices. We talked about learning from mistakes, but again, both pitfalls and, of course, best practices are helpful to understand. Like, this is what I recommend doing. We also recommend don't doing things. And what's interesting as executives, and if you're thinking about working through productivity, is that you can list all the virtues, all the right things that you can do. Here's all the wonderful reasons we should do this. But what do people listen to? They listen to the fact that, someone's going to die on your watch, or they're listening to the pain points. And so I talk about, having the pitfalls first. before we jump into best practices. But I think it's important when we think about best practices that this is not the first time this has happened. Southeast Asia did not just magically appear, into the business world recently. In fact, they've been around in many cases longer than most traditional side of things. So when we think about this, some of the top best practices, James, that you can think of that just do this. We talked about don't do this, but what would you really advocate for people to do if they're thinking of growing or building a business in Southeast Asia?
I'm going to start with number 5 here, enjoy the journey, and add to it to enjoy the relationships. Life is about building relationships, blessing others through our business. It's important to slow down, not get too stressed about those challenges, and really interact well with the people that you're partnering with.
Yeah, that's great. What's interesting is just as you get older, you start appreciating, how quickly time moves through. And while we really, in many cases, in a business setting, we want to be productive, we really do need to remember that it isn't always about the destination, it's the journey. And that journey actually allows you to continue to have more journeys, especially as you build relationships within culture. I think that's so helpful. I come out of the project management world, so we really try and say we plan, we kind of adapt as we plan, we make sure we're aligned to our goals and objectives. But when we've worked with international groups, whether it's Southeast Asia or Latin America or even some different parts of Detroit, I will tell you that culture sometimes will trump almost everything. And so you really need to understand that you don't have to reinvent that wheel. There's a lot of good knowledge. Having a partner to walk you through helps, or at least a coach or a guide. But the idea is that you have to know at some point when things aren't working, not to just keep pouring more time and energy thinking that it's going to get better, but to really step back and go, hey, we want to learn. Something's not working here. It doesn't feel right. Let's talk about it. Let's think through that. And as you said, James, having that partner relationship, having that relationship with your resources allows you to have very open conversations where there's things that we just don't see that they can help share. And that again, that journey becomes much more enjoyable. All right. Any other best practices you can think of? Anything you want to call out?
It is definitely worth investing in those relationships to build on those partnerships, not only to lower costs, increase markets, but to find new solutions to problems that maybe we don't even know exist.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And so people in many cases are afraid to say, look, I hear that, labor might be cheaper somewhere else. But really, the idea is that there's a lot of work that needs to happen, but it is doable. It does make sense. Advisicon has embraced this. While we have localized resources in every country, in many cases, there are things that we can just do better, faster, because we have a broader team, and they are innovating and looking at it a little bit differently. So I encourage people to not be afraid, but to certainly do the reconnaissance, to dig in and see if that's possible. Well, I know we probably could, teach a 5-day seminar on all these things, James, but let me recap a little bit here for today. And I think that's helpful is that, the results you achieve will certainly be in direct proportion to the effort you apply. And I think that's important to say when you connect with a partner or you work with a local resource, you begin really digging into improving your productivity in regional efforts. That partnership, that relationship piece that we're talking about are huge. So today, a couple things here is just, creating results, while you're trying to navigate through political climate, VUCA events, market forces, there's a lot are going on. But it is possible, and organizations do it well and successfully. But they've talked about how they plan for the unknown. They plan for the learning. We use the word thrive. I think I started talking about this a couple of years ago, which is it's not just about surviving, it's about thriving. And so as we pivot and adapt, it's important that you as a partner plan for this and connect with someone who can kind of either give you coaching or guidance. And, James, this is a great place where you come in. But global teams, if you're not familiar with that, talk to somebody who has, whether it's hiring, staffing, even, when is productivity saying, no, that's not that's not right. We need to let someone go, or we need to transition the skill set from an older tech to a newer tech. This is helpful to work from. And then for me, of course, coming out of the technology sector as well, is that There's some great tools coming. But James, what are your thoughts? If you're thinking about if someone could partner directly with you, or if you were to give some free advice, which I think you do, that people can talk to you, what would you want to point them and say, yep, these are some of the things to walk away and remember?
Well, I'm certainly would welcome those conversations if people would like to have an initial consult time. But we want people to see that there's opportunities, that there's extremely bright young people desperate for good jobs, wanting to stay in their own community with their family, help their community locally instead of leaving as migrant workers. And these hungry young workers can provide significant value added to our global teams.
Yeah, it's exciting to see the passion and energy when you give somebody the opportunity. Like we talk about, you can get a fish or you can teach them to fish. And so this is an investment, but it has huge dividends. And it is so exciting to make a difference for folks in different regions. So, well, I know this is all the time that we have today, but I wanted to kind of wrap up here. And again, just thank you so much, James, for coming in and presenting to us. I've got James's contact information here if you want to reach out to him. If you want to hear more about some of the technologies that make working with cross-cultural or international organizations work productively, plenty of videos on our YouTube channel, and either or, just reach out. I think it's a great opportunity for you to learn from somebody who is an expert, and working in these regions that says this is doable and how will that work. So James, again, I appreciate your time today. This has been wonderful to have you here. And again, for all of you watching, I said, don't hesitate to reach out. James's contact information is right there. And then you had, I think, a couple websites, didn't you? Let me see if I'll bring those back up.
We have silkroadprofessionals.com on our programming teams, and then silkroadprofessionals.us, which is the consulting business.
Wonderful. Again, thank you so much for your time today. God bless, and hope you guys will have a productive rest of your time.
Thank you, Tim.
Bye now.